You are enduring a slow, quiet death. It is not a failing of the flesh. Your heart continues its rhythmic beating, and your lungs instinctively draw breath. Yet the core of your being is suffocating. There is a vital, dangerous, and profoundly authentic element within you that is being systematically extinguished. This execution does not happen on a scaffold. It happens daily, conversation by conversation, polite nod by polite nod. You are being strangled by an invisible hand. It is the collective crushing grip of they. They are the amorphous crowd, the societal expectations that dictate the rhythm of your existence. They have decided what timeline your life must follow. They think you should be married by now. They think you should possess a stable, predictable job that aligns with their metrics of success. They observe your nature and pass unsolicited judgment. They whisper that you are too quiet, or perhaps too loud. They label you too ambitious, or they condemn you for lacking the ambition they deem appropriate. You hear these judgments, and you tremble. You are terrified of the heavy, judging silence that inevitably follows their disapproval. Because you fear this exile, you bow your head, you obey, you perform, you actively contort your own soul. You twist your spine and break your own spirit just to fit seamlessly into the suffocating boxes they constructed for you. You have willingly become a mere actor in a tragedy you did not write. Every day, you stand on a stage reciting hollow lines you do not believe. You perform desperately for an audience of passing strangers and acquaintances who do not actually care if you live or die. The Stoic understands that this is a surrender of the inner citadel. Niccolo Machiavelli, deeply misunderstood by history, recognized the exact architecture of this mental prison. He knew why you sacrifice yourself. Machiavelli understood that the undisciplined human mind is exceedingly fragile. It is desperate for the warmth of external validation and utterly terrified of the coldness of isolation. But he also mapped the cure. The masses assume Machiavelli merely wrote a manual on how to ruthlessly rule a geographic kingdom. They are blind. His true masterpiece is a treatise on how to seize absolute sovereignty over your own reality. The foundational axiom of his philosophy is brutally absolute. If you do not actively rule yourself, you will inevitably be ruled by others. Nature abhors a vacuum. Your mind is a territory that will be conquered if left unguarded. There is absolutely no middle ground in this war for your autonomy. There is no democratic process within the human soul. You are either the undisputed prince of your own mind or a pathetic servant sweeping someone else's courtyard. The path to freedom requires a psychological exorcism. We must systematically eradicate the parasitic need for external validation that society has aggressively programmed into your nervous system since the moment of your birth. We must turn to the cold, unyielding mechanics of power. We do not study Machiavellian realism to manipulate the innocent. We study it as armor to permanently stop the world from manipulating and consuming our vital energy. There are ruthless principles necessary to transform you from a trembling, people-pleasing victim into a sovereign, unshakable entity. But this knowledge offers no warm comfort. It is not coddling self-help. It is martial self-defense. Once you perceive the invisible strings that have been directing your limbs and dictating your words, you will never be able to unsee them. The illusion of societal harmony shatters forever. The consequences of this awakening are severe. You will inevitably lose friends. You will upset your family. The crowd will eagerly label you cold, callous, and terribly selfish. But a profound transformation will occur within the silence of their rejection. For the very first time in your mortal existence, their accusations will echo in the void, and you will feel absolutely nothing. You will not care. You will finally taste the cold, crisp air of true freedom. But reaching that summit requires a sacrifice. You must be willing to mercilessly kill the pathetic, weeping part of your ego that constantly begs to be liked by the mob. Let us confront the foundational lie that keeps you shackled to the opinions of the masses. You have been indoctrinated with a poisonous definition of virtue. You were told that being a good person means being perpetually agreeable. Society has whispered a dangerous myth into your ear that the highest moral achievement is absolute self-sacrifice. You were taught that erasing your own needs to accommodate the demands of others is the definition of nobility. This is not virtue. It is a meticulously crafted slave morality. It is a system of ethics designed by the weak to keep the strong, docile, and useful. It is a philosophy that demands your submission under the guise of morality. Machiavelli observed this fatal flaw with piercing clarity. He wrote that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in every circumstance will inevitably come to ruin among so many who are not good. Meditate on the absolute truth of that statement. If you insist on navigating this harsh reality by being universally nice and accommodating to everyone, you will be systematically dismantled and destroyed by those who harbor no such illusions. Why is this the inevitable outcome? Because the objective world is not inherently nice. Human beings are largely driven by base instincts, self-interest, the preservation of ego, and raw biological survival. When you prioritize the fragile feelings of strangers over the undeniable reality of your own boundaries, you are making a fatal tactical error. You are naively bringing a delicate bouquet of flowers to a vicious knife fight. You operate under a delusion. You secretly believe that your endless self-sacrifice is a currency buying you unconditional love and loyalty. You think that if you set yourself on fire to keep them warm, they will revere your ashes. They will not revere you. They will briefly enjoy the warmth of your destruction, and then they will audaciously complain that your burning body is not producing enough heat for their comfort. And when you are finally reduced to nothing but cold ash, fully depleted of your essence, they will not mourn you. They will simply step over your remains and walk away in search of new combustible fuel to consume. This is the harsh, unvarnished reality of human nature that the Stoics and Machiavelli refused to ignore. We must look at humanity without the rosy tint of romanticism. We must see men exactly as they are. People in their unexamined state are deeply flawed. They are ungrateful for the sacrifices of others, entirely fickle in their loyalties, prone to falsehood, cowardly in the face of true danger, and relentlessly covetous of what you possess. When the sun is shining and you are succeeding, they will swear absolute devotion. They will happily offer you their blood, their property, their lives, and their children provided. The actual need for these things remains safely in the distant future. But the moment the storm arrives and true sacrifice is required, their grand promises evaporate. When danger approaches your door, they revolt, they scatter. This is not bitter cynicism. It is merely rational observation of historical patterns. Turn the lens of this philosophy onto your own history. Scrutinize your past actions. Look at the countless times you forced yourself to say yes when your inner voice was screaming no. Did the people you accommodated genuinely respect your sacrifice? Did they recognize the violence you did to your own will? No, they simply absorbed your compliance and expected it as the baseline standard the very next time. When you construct your entire existence around living for others, you are actively conditioning them. You are meticulously teaching the world exactly how to treat you, and the lesson you teach is one of profound disrespect. You are explicitly teaching them that your time is a cheap, abundant commodity. You are demonstrating that your stated boundaries are merely polite suggestions, easily bypassed with slight pressure. You signal that your very soul is perpetually on sale. Through your relentless accommodation, you broadcast a dangerous frequency. You signal to predators and opportunists that you are a resource waiting to be harvested, rather than a sovereign individual demanding basic respect. The profound philosophical shift begins the exact moment you realize a hard truth. Goodness that lacks the power to enforce its own boundaries is not virtue at all. It is simply submission disguised as morality. True virtue, the kind that anchors a stable soul, requires the immense psychological strength to say no. It requires the fortitude to stand firm as a rock against the crashing waves of others' disappointment. It requires the cultivated capacity to be openly disliked. You must deliberately unlearn the habit of universal compliance. You must master the difficult, vital art of learning how not to be conventionally good all the time. This radical reclamation of self does not mean you suddenly adopt malice. It does not mean you abandon reason and actively harm innocent people for mere sport or petty vengeance. It simply means you make a conscious decision to stop being universally harmless. A completely harmless man is not moral. He is merely incapable of action. True peace comes from possessing sharp edges and choosing to keep them sheathed. It means you begin to fiercely guard your benevolence. You reserve your kindness exclusively for those who have demonstrably earned it through loyalty and mutual respect, rather than broadcasting it to the mob. A wise prince does not foolishly scatter his gold into the muddy streets, desperately hoping the fickle mob will love him for his reckless generosity. He fiercely guards his treasury against parasites. Your internal energy is your most precious gold. Your focused attention is your rarest currency. You must immediately stop throwing it at ungrateful people who would not shed a single drop of blood to defend your honor. Living fiercely for yourself demands a ruthless, uncompromising audit of your own benevolence. You must sit in silence and interrogate your motives. Who are you currently serving, and what is the true reason for your service? If you strip away the rationalizations and find that your answer is simply, "I do it because I don't want them to be angry with me," then you must accept a grim reality. You are not a friend. You are a hostage. Why is breaking this pattern so agonizingly difficult? Why does the mere thought of disappointing your parents, alienating your partner, or facing the judgment of faceless strangers cause your stomach to churn with visceral dread? The answer lies deep within your biology. You are suffering because you are fundamentally addicted to the concept of the audience. We are physically wired by millions of years of evolution to belong to a tribe. In our ancestral past, the math of survival was simple. Being cast out of the tribe meant absolute, inescapable death. If the collective group decided they disliked you, you froze, you starved, or you were consumed by predators. To prevent this grim fate, the primitive brain developed a brutal but highly effective survival mechanism: social anxiety. That sudden, sharp spike of terror you feel when someone criticizes you is not a moral failing. That anxiety is merely your ancient reptilian brain screaming that you are in mortal danger. It falsely signals that exile is imminent and demands that you immediately fix the situation. It commands you to apologize and submit, but you must use your rational faculty to overpower this primitive illusion. You are no longer wandering the dangerous, unforgiving savannah. You exist within the relative safety of the modern 21st century. The stakes of social disapproval have drastically changed. If your manager dislikes the presentation you delivered, you will not die of starvation. You will simply return home and eat. The biological panic is a complete overreaction. If your family loudly disapproves of the unconventional career path you have chosen, a tiger is not going to suddenly emerge from the shadows to devour you. The physical danger you perceive is a pure hallucination. Yet, while the physical danger is a phantom, the psychological cage it constructs around your life is entirely real. You have unconsciously built a massive, echoing mental theater inside your own mind. In this oppressive theater of your imagination, the stadium seating is completely filled with the specters of everyone you have ever known. The audience is constantly watching, constantly judging your every movement. Your childhood teachers sit in the front row. The popular peers from your youth occupy the balconies. Your former lovers, your current colleagues, and the vague, judgmental mass of society fill every remaining seat. Before you execute a single decision, you unconsciously look up at this phantom audience. You wait in agonizing suspense for their phantom applause, and you live in paralyzing fear of their phantom booing. You ask yourself quietly, should I accept this new opportunity? You look to the audience. Should I wear this specific garment? You look to the audience. Should I finally speak my authentic truth? You look to the audience for permission. The Stoic path, aligned with Machiavelli's supreme realism, demands that you immediately clear the theatre. You must forcefully evict these phantoms from your mind. He understood that a man's reputation is merely a tool, never his master. A sovereign individual only cares about the shifting opinions of the masses, insofar as those opinions tangibly serve a specific, overarching strategy. He never relies on their approval to maintain his own emotional equilibrium. You must recognize the profound structural difference between strategically managing public perception and desperately needing internal validation. These two states of mind exist in completely different universes of power. Managing perception is an exercise of absolute power. It is cold, calculating, and deliberate. It allows you to say, if I choose to project anger in this specific moment, I will extract the respect I require. It allows you to calculate, if I choose to remain perfectly silent in this chaotic negotiation, I will cultivate an aura of unpredictable mystery that gives me the tactical advantage. This is playing the game without becoming the piece. Conversely, the desperate need for validation is the essence of weakness. It is a purely reactive state of being. It is the pathetic internal whisper that says, I genuinely hope they think I am intelligent today. I hope they perceive me as successful. The exact millisecond you require the crowd to clap in order for you to feel whole, they completely own you. They hold the remote control to your nervous system. To truly live for yourself, you must violently fire the entire audience. You must internalize a liberating, humbling truth. The vast majority of people are not actually looking at you at all. They are entirely consumed by their own neuroses. They are desperately looking at themselves. Every single person in the crowd is obsessing over their own clumsy performance within their own elaborate mental theaters. They are drowning in their own insecurities and fighting their own phantom audiences. They do not possess the time or the cognitive surplus to deeply analyze the script of your life. They are far too busy frantically trying to memorize and recite the lines of their own tragic plays. But even if we assume the absolute worst, even if they are dedicating their precious time to actively, maliciously judging your every action, the Stoic asks the ultimate question, so what? What exactly changes in the fabric of reality? Let us apply rational physics to the concept of a human opinion, break it down to its most fundamental elements. What is it in objective reality? Is an opinion a heavy, solid object that can physically crush your bones? Can the disapproval of a neighbor manifest as a sharp blade and literally slice through your physical skin? Can the whispered gossip of a co-worker magically reach into the digital ether and empty your bank accounts? The answer is categorically no. An opinion is nothing more than a momentary synaptic firing within the dark confines of someone else's biological brain. It is an electrical spark that flares and dies in an instant. An opinion is merely a fleeting thought form briefly dissolved in a chaotic soup of neurochemicals, safely trapped inside a skull that does not belong to you. It has no mass, no physical force, and no objective power. Why then are you willfully allowing a transient chemical reaction occurring inside another person's head to completely dictate the grand trajectory of your singular, unrepeatable life? It is a state of absolute insanity. Machiavelli suggests the adoption of a highly specific emotional posture to combat this insanity. The posture is contempt. We do not mean the hot, emotional, screaming kind of contempt that stems from deeply wounded pride. We mean the cold, perfectly indifferent kind of contempt. It is the tranquil gaze of a stoic monument observing the passing centuries. It is the profound quiet of a deep ocean beneath a turbulent surface storm. It is the exact kind of serene contempt that calmly looks down at a rabid barking dog in the street, observes the noise, and simply chooses not to bark back. You recognize the noise, but you do not internalize it. When you finally begin to live entirely for yourself, you learn to treat the swirling opinions of other people exactly as you treat the changing weather. They are natural phenomena, totally outside of your control and entirely unworthy of your anger. You might rationally choose to carry an umbrella if the sky threatens rain, altering your tactics to accommodate the environment. But you do not stand in the street and furiously scream at the dark clouds to change their nature. You simply observe the conditions, make the necessary tactical adjustments, and continue walking steadily toward your chosen destination. You remain the undisputed master of your own forward momentum. You must aggressively restructure your inner world so that you become the sole exclusive spectator sitting in your own mental theater. The seats must be emptied of all ghosts and phantoms. You are the sole author who writes the intricate play of your life. You are the sole actor who steps onto the stage to perform the role. And crucially, you are the only critic authorized to review the final performance. If at the end of the day you can stand before the mirror, look deep into your own eyes and feel profound satisfaction with the integrity of your actions, then the deafening silence of the external crowd means absolutely nothing. We must now examine the most famously brutal and chronically misused line in all of Machiavellian philosophy, that it is fundamentally much safer to be feared by men than to be loved by them. Machiavelli reasoned that love is held together merely by a fragile link of mutual obligation. Because of the inherent baseness of human nature, this flimsy link is ruthlessly broken the exact moment men see an advantage in betraying you. But fear, he argued, is a far more reliable mechanism. Fear is preserved by a deep, instinctual dread of punishment. Unlike fleeting affection, the dread of consequences is an anchor that absolutely never fails in holding a man's behavior in check. To utilize this wisdom, we must strip away the grand political context of 16th century Italy. We must surgically apply this dark principle directly to the intricate psychology of your modern everyday life. We are obviously not advising you to roam the streets, committing violence, terrorizing your friends, or ruling your household with tyrannical cruelty. That is the crude interpretation of a small, unphilosophical mind. In the refined context of the modern social landscape, the ancient concept of Machiavellian fear translates directly into profound respect. Conversely, the concept of love translates into pleasant, harmless likability. The vast majority of weak individuals consistently choose to pursue likability over respect. They desperately want to be known as the easygoing friend, the endlessly accommodating employee, the infinitely chill and undemanding partner. They operate under a fatal delusion. They genuinely believe that extreme likability acts as an indestructible safety net. They think that if everyone smiles at them, they will never fall. They are wrong. It is not a net. Excessive likability is not a safety net. It is a concealed trapdoor waiting to drop you into the abyss. When you elevate being liked to your highest priority, you instantly become dangerously malleable to the whims of others. You surrender your structural integrity, you lose your sharp edges and your solid form. You transform yourself into a pathetic, shapeless fluid that passively takes the exact shape of whatever situational container you are poured into. And the cold truth of the world is this: human beings do not respect fluid. It offers no resistance. They simply consume it when they are thirsty, or they carelessly spill it on the ground when they are done. True respect, the psychological equivalent of Machiavellian fear, is generated strictly by having defined edges. It emanates from the unshakable presence of internal standards that you absolutely refuse to compromise for anyone. It is born from a quiet, terrifying aura of self-sufficiency. It comes from projecting the unspoken but absolute understanding that you are fully capable of walking away from any table where respect is no longer being served. This willingness to leave is the exact modern equivalent of the dread of punishment in a social context. It is the sudden, chilling realization in the minds of others that your continued presence in their life is a rare privilege. They must understand that your company is a privilege that must be actively earned and maintained, not a permanent guarantee that they can exploit with impunity. Your absence is the punishment they must quietly dread. Observe the profound inversion of power that occurs. If you live entirely for others, you spend your days consumed by the terrified anxiety that they might one day abandon you. You cling to them with the desperation of a drowning man. But if you strip away that need and begin to live fiercely for yourself, the entire dynamic violently flips. You become the solid ground. Suddenly they become utterly terrified of the possibility that you might decide to leave them behind. Contemplate the individuals in this world whom you respect most deeply. Analyze their character. Are they the weak, agreeable individuals who nod quickly and agree with every single syllable you utter? Are they the anxious souls who constantly apologize for taking up physical space, who shrink their personalities to avoid causing minor friction? Absolutely not. You might find them pleasant, but you do not revere them. The people who command your deepest reverence are the ones who operate strictly by an internal code. They are the unmovable mountains. They are the individuals who can look you in the eye and say a firm no without offering a single word of apology or explanation. They are the rare few who are entirely willing to endure the discomfort of social friction in order to viciously defend their core values. They prefer the heat of conflict to the coldness of self-betrayal. You might not always find them pleasant or agreeable in the heat of the moment. You might frequently find their rigid boundaries incredibly difficult to navigate. But beneath that frustration lies a bedrock of absolute unshakable respect. You place a high premium on their praise precisely because they do not hand it out like cheap candy. Their validation has immense value because it is exceedingly rare. You value their time because they guard it with the ferocity of a dragon. Machiavelli whispers this timeless truth across the centuries. You cannot construct a stable, enduring life on the shifting, sandy foundation of simply being liked. The soil is fundamentally too unstable to support a heavy structure. The moods of the masses fluctuate wildly like the tides. Their shallow tastes change with the changing winds. If the core pillar of your identity is built on their continued approval, your entire temple will violently crumble the moment the wind shifts. But if you choose the harder path, if you painstakingly build the foundation of your life entirely on the bedrock of profound self-respect you build with indestructible stone, let the storms rage. The stone does not care about the rain. To truly live as a sovereign entity, you must not only tolerate the fact that some people will dislike you, you must actively cultivate the willingness to be disliked. It is a necessary badge of honor on the path to freedom. In fact, a stoic mind goes further. You should welcome their dislike. If you navigate this entire chaotic world and absolutely nobody strongly dislikes you, it is a grim diagnostic of your character. It means you are doing absolutely nothing of value. Universal likability is proof that you stand for absolutely nothing. You have successfully blended into the background radiation of society. You are not a living, breathing force of nature. You are merely a formless, transparent ghost. The active dislike of others is a powerful affirmative signal. It is the definitive proof that you have successfully surveyed your psychological territory and drawn hard, uncompromising borders around your identity. It means you have firmly planted your feet occupied physical and spiritual space and audaciously declared to the universe, "This is precisely who I am, and I will not move." When someone encounters that rigid boundary, hits the wall of your resolve, and declares, "I do not like that," and you still refuse to yield an inch of ground, that is the exact moment you manifest pure, unadulterated power. Abandon the pathetic, exhausting crusade to be known as the universally nice guy or the endlessly sweet girl. These are titles awarded to the weak as consolation prizes for their submission. Strive instead for competence and terrifying capability. Aim to be a truly formidable individual. Become a person driven by an internal mission so intensely compelling, so undeniably grand, that whether the crowd decides to join you or actively hate you becomes entirely irrelevant to the final outcome. Let us now examine the most common and pathetic way we willingly hemorrhage our internal power. We do not lose it in grand battles. We slowly leak it away through the undisciplined flapping of our own mouths. We talk entirely too much. We habitually overshare the intimate details of our lives. We constantly feel the neurotic need to explain our unexecuted plans to people who have no stake in our actual success. You conceive a fragile, beautiful dream in the quiet of your mind. Instead of protecting it, you immediately rush to tell your friends. You formulate a strategy for victory, and instead of executing it, you broadcast it to the void of social media. You encounter a temporary obstacle, and instead of silently solving it, you seek out your co-workers to loudly vent your frustrations. With every unnecessary word spoken, you are actively draining the kinetic energy required for actual execution. Understand the severe tactical error you are making. Every single time you eagerly hand someone the unfinished blueprint of your plans, you are simultaneously handing them a powerful veto over your ambition. By speaking prematurely, you are willfully leaving the heavy iron gates of your inner sanctuary wide open, openly inviting their unexamined doubts, their chronic fears, and their personal limitations to walk inside and contaminate your vision. You declare with naive excitement, "I am going to build a new business." Immediately, the conditioned response fires back. "Oh, really? In this terrible economy, my cousin attempted that very thing and lost everything he had." Boom. The psychological payload has been successfully delivered. You are now burdened with carrying the crushing weight of their personal cowardice. You were preparing to achieve liftoff, and you foolishly allowed them to tie a massive lead weight directly to your ankle. You must understand that they do not sabotage you because they actively hate you. The tragedy is that they often do it because they genuinely love you, and their love is heavily infected with terror. They are afraid of the unknown on your behalf. But regardless of their soft, well-meaning intentions, the objective result on your trajectory remains exactly the same. Their projected fear compromises your buoyancy. You sink beneath the waves of their mediocrity. Machiavelli was an absolute master of the strategic weapon of silence. He understood deeply that a truly cunning prince never publicly reveals the full scope of his grand design until the decisive move has already been flawlessly executed. He wrote that there is absolutely no avoiding war. It can only be temporarily postponed, and always to the direct tactical advantage of your enemies. You must recognize that the pursuit of self-mastery is an act of total war against the status quo. In the context of your personal evolution, the war is the brutal daily struggle to fundamentally change your nature, to shed your old skin, and forge yourself into something sharper, harder, and entirely new. When you foolishly announce your intended movements ahead of time, you are generously giving the enemy the entrenched status quo, the vocal doubters, the miserable crabs trapped in the bucket, the crucial time they need to organize a defensive front against your escape. True sovereignty and living exclusively for yourself requires the disciplined mastery of strategic secrecy. You must learn to swallow your words. You must keep your deepest counsel locked securely within the vault of your own mind. Cultivate the discipline to build your empire in the absolute dark. There is a well-documented psychological trap known as social reality that punishes the talkative. When you loudly declare to the world that you are going to achieve a specific goal, Your easily deceived brain immediately releases a premature hit of dopamine. You feel a rush of satisfaction as if the grueling work has already been completed. This unearned neurochemical reward is catastrophic. It actively reduces the vital burning motivation required to actually sit down and endure the necessary suffering to bring the plan into physical existence. You consume the reward before fighting the battle. But the danger of speaking goes even deeper into the darkness of the human psyche. When you are still infected with the disease of living for others, you unconsciously use conversation not to inform, but as a covert mechanism to beg for permission. You exhaustively detail the rationalizations behind your life choices because you are desperately hungry for them to nod their heads in unison and validate you by saying, "Yes, that seems like a highly sensible and safe path." You are behaving like an anxious traveler, terrified of the border guards, desperately looking for an official stamp of approval on your passport before you dare to take a single step into the uncharted territory of your own potential. You must immediately cease the pathetic habit of offering explanations. Exhaustive explanations are the defensive tools of the subordinate. They are the language of the servant trying to justify his actions to the master. True leaders do not waste breath explaining the intricate mechanisms of their choices to the crowd. A sovereign mind simply declares the new reality, or infinitely better than declaration, the sovereign mind simply acts without uttering a single sound. If you have determined that you must quit your soul-crushing job, do not seek cowardly advice from colleagues who are paralyzed by the exact same fear that keeps them chained to their desks. Their advice is corrupted by their own submission. If you decide to forge a new physical vessel and change your body, do not discuss the intricacies of your grueling discipline with people who are hopelessly addicted to the soft, decaying lethargy of modern comfort. Silence is an impenetrable, invisible shield. It wraps around your embryonic, fragile ideas and violently repels the harsh, freezing winds of external criticism before they can freeze your momentum. Furthermore, weaponized silence creates a powerful aura of undeniable mystery. When you become an unreadable cipher, when you suddenly stop broadcasting, every thought, human nature compels people to project their own deepest thoughts onto your blank canvas. They will lie awake, wondering what grand designs you are quietly constructing in the shadows. They will lean in, fascinated by the sudden void where your desperate noise used to be. Your silence commands more attention than your shouts ever could. But the most crucial benefit of silence is internal. When you forcefully close your mouth and refuse to ask the world, "What do you think of my plan?" you create an absolute vacuum. You are now violently forced to look inward and ask, "What do I actually think?" This sudden pivot inward is deeply terrifying for the uninitiated. When you first cut off the external noise, the internal silence is absolutely deafening. You will acutely feel the aching, hollow void where the warm drug of societal validation used to flow. You must possess the stoic endurance to sit perfectly still within that cold void. Do not run from it. Do not pick up a screen to distract yourself. Sit in the uncomfortable silence until your eyes adjust to the dark, because it is precisely within that terrifying quiet void that you finally meet the unvarnished truth of yourself. That is the blazing forge where the raw ore of your potential is hammered into unbending iron. Machiavelli offers a rule of supreme self-reliance. You must never consult with anyone in the external world regarding your strategic decisions unless you have first exhaustively and ruthlessly consulted with yourself. You must actively transform your mind into an impenetrable black box. Information, acute observation, and cold strategy are the inputs allowed to freely enter the system. You observe everything and reveal nothing. But absolutely nothing of substance is allowed to leak out of the box until the final result is perfectly formed and fully weaponized. You remain a silent factory of ambition until the work is complete, When you finally pull back the curtain and present the world with an undeniable finished product, a revolutionized career, an unbreakable physique, a completely reinvented life, they are rendered entirely powerless to argue with it. They cannot debate a reality that has already manifested. They can only stand in quiet awe and witness the sheer force of your executed will. Remember this. Law verbal arguments are for fragile plans. Silent awe is the only appropriate response to concrete results. We have successfully secured the internal citadel of the mind. The foundational mindset of sovereignty is established. Now, like a paranoid general, we must move to secure the external perimeter of your life. Machiavelli dedicated vast portions of his writings to the complex mechanics of warfare and the structure of armies. He issued severe, unyielding warnings against the fatal mistake of relying on mercenary and auxiliary troops. Mercenaries are soldiers who fight exclusively for coin, possessing no internal loyalty to the prince. Auxiliaries are troops borrowed from another powerful ruler, ultimately answering to a different master. He declared unequivocally that both are utterly useless and profoundly dangerous to the sovereign. Why? Because their fundamental alignment is flawed. They possess absolutely no deep-seated loyalty to your specific cause or your ultimate survival. In periods of calm and peace, these transactional soldiers will rapidly drain your treasury and despoil your resources. But the moment the drums of true war sound and their blood is required, they will immediately desert you on the battlefield. You must possess the courage to look at your current social circle through this cold Machiavellian lens. Who are the emotional mercenaries currently operating within the borders of your life? They are the individuals who only magically appear in your presence when you have something tangible to offer them. They are the parasites who flock to your side only when you are the one driving the car, paying for the meal, or providing the entertainment. And who are the treacherous auxiliaries? They are the chaotic individuals who fundamentally belong to another tribe, tethered to a destructive mindset. They are the ones who violently drag you away from your purpose and pull you deep into the trenches of their endless, pointless drama. Stepping into true self-ownership requires you to conduct a brutal, uncompromising audit of all your existing alliances. You must weigh every connection on the scales of your grand strategy. This is precisely the agonizing stage where the vast majority of weak individuals falter and fail. They cannot execute the purge because they are infected with crippling sentimentality. They prefer the familiar rot to the sterile pain of the scalpel. They tragically hold on to ancient childhood friends simply out of habit, stubbornly ignoring the fact that these friends have slowly mutated into profoundly toxic, ambitionless adults who anchor them to the past. They helplessly hold on to manipulative family members who expertly wield historical guilt and emotional blackmail as weapons of control. They tolerate intimate partners who quietly mock their highest ambitions and systematically sabotage their discipline. When confronted with this toxic decay, the weak individual will desperately defend the parasite. They will tell themselves the ultimate lie of the hostage. But we have so much history together. I cannot simply cut them away. To this sentimental plea, the ghost of Machiavelli would coldly ask, does the mere existence of history win wars? The answer is written in the blood of defeated nations. No. Sentimental history wins nothing. It is superior strategy that wins battles. It is unyielding strength and martial discipline that secure the victory. If your overarching objective is to rapidly construct an entirely new, structurally sound life, you must act accordingly. You absolutely cannot keep the incompetent, corrupt architects of your old collapsing life on your current payroll. If they do not understand the physics of your new empire, they will inevitably sabotage the foundation. You must step into the sterile room and perform radical necessary surgery on your own social perimeter. And surgery, by its very medical definition, inherently involves violent cutting. It involves blood. It involves significant, unavoidable pain. It necessitates the careful, precise removal of specific parts of your daily life that you mistakenly believed were vital organs, but upon closer inspection have proven to be entirely gangrenous and lethal to your overall health. As you aggressively begin the process of living exclusively for yourself, a profound internal alchemy will occur. Your fundamental nature will shift. The core vibration of your existence will change frequencies entirely. You will simply lose the physical capacity to tolerate overt disrespect. The pointless buzzing noise of idle gossip will become physically nauseating to your ears. You will absolutely refuse to engage in the weak bonding ritual of endless complaining, and you must prepare for the inevitable blowback. The mediocre people who currently surround you will absolutely despise this new version of you. They will loudly and bitterly accuse you. You have completely changed. They will spit the word changed at you as if it were a profound moral failing, an indictment, a severe crime against their comfort. They want the old, compliant, broken version of you back in the cage. Your only appropriate response to this desperate accusation should be an impenetrable wall of silence, because in their panic, they are speaking an absolute truth. You have changed. That was the entire point of the war. You have violently refused to continue serving as a passive, reflecting mirror for their own glaring insecurities. You have officially resigned from your pathetic role as the reliable, suffering sidekick in their endless, self-authored tragedy. You must summon the immense psychological courage to walk utterly alone in the freezing dark, rather than willingly marching in lockstep with a parade of heavy anchors who are determined to drag you down to the bottom of the ocean. Machiavelli codified this principle of isolation into law. A wise prince should always rely entirely on what is his own, and never under any circumstances on what belongs to others. In the realm of psychology, this strict decree translates to absolute emotional self-sufficiency. It dictates that your internal weather must never be dictated by the shifting barometric pressure of other people's approval. It means that if your longtime friends decide to suddenly abandon you simply because you dared to erect healthy, non-negotiable boundaries, you must let them leave without shedding a single tear. In fact, you should politely open the door to expedite their exit. If your own blood family decides to violently attack your character because you have chosen a steep, arduous path that their limited minds cannot possibly comprehend, you must absorb the attack without retreating a single inch from your blood position. Do not flinch. Do not attempt to pacify their fragile egos. This intense burning friction is the heavy toll you must pay at the toll booth of absolute sovereignty. Freedom is exceedingly expensive, and the currency is comfort. You must completely reframe your perception of isolation. True isolation is never a punitive sentence handed down by a cruel universe. It is a highly efficient, necessary filtration system designed to protect the citadel. When you ruthlessly eradicate the chaotic, draining noise of the emotional mercenaries, you instantly create a vast, echoing space. You clear the battlefield. You prepare the soil for something vastly superior to take root. You create the necessary vacuum for the truly loyal to eventually enter. You clear the stage to make room for the rare individuals who will profoundly respect the ironclad architecture of the new you, rather than mourning the weak ghost of the old you. But to reach this promised land of authentic connection, you must pass the ultimate test of endurance. You must be entirely willing to sit calmly in the empty, silent room first. You must befriend the echo of your own breath. You have to forge the internal fortitude to endure the long, brutal stretch of the social winter. You must survive the freezing months where the old leaves have fallen dead to the ground and the new buds have not yet dared to emerge. The vast, pathetic majority of the human herd would far rather huddle together in a suffocatingly warm room, surrounded by fake friends who secretly despise them, than stand alone in the freezing cold, armed only with their intact dignity. You must swear an oath to be the glaring exception to this tragic rule, willingly and deliberately choose the biting cold. The cold is a preservative. It hardens the steel of the soul and preserves the integrity of the mind. The suffocating artificial heat generated by a dense crowd of fake transactional relationships does absolutely nothing but accelerate the inevitable rot of your unique potential. Seek the freezing peaks of self-reliance. We must now address the supreme crime you commit against yourself when you prioritize the herd. If you are dedicating your existence to living for others, you are not a martyr. You are a common thief. You are systematically embezzling from the vault of your own limited future. You are stealing the pure, unrecoverable gold of your future potential simply to pay off the petty compounding debts of your present psychological insecurity. You are bankrupting your destiny to purchase a fleeting moment of social comfort. Understand the terrifying metaphysics of the clock. Time is the absolute singular resource in this universe that the capricious goddess Fortuna absolutely refuses to refund under any circumstances. A devastating financial ruin can be reversed with cunning and labor. Lost political or social power can be methodically clawed back from enemies. Even profound romantic love, once shattered, can be rediscovered in a new form. But time operates on a completely different physical law. Once the grains of sand slip through the narrow neck of the hourglass, once the second hand ticks forward, that fragment of your existence is violently swallowed into the eternal void. It is annihilated forever, utterly inaccessible to the tears of regret. Machiavelli, operating in a world of constant mortal peril, was absolutely obsessed with the precise mechanics of timing. He relentlessly studied the crucial concept of the occasione, the fleeting momentary window of divine opportunity that silently cracks open for a fraction of a second and then slams shut with deafening finality. When your eyes are permanently fixed on the needs of the crowd, when you live to serve others, you are entirely blind to the subtle shifts in the wind. You will inevitably miss the occasione every single time it presents itself. You foolishly squander hours of irreplaceable life sitting passively, acting as a free therapist, listening to a weak friend endlessly complain about a pathetic problem they possess absolutely no intention of actually solving. You systematically burn away your precious weekends attending trivial social events you secretly despise, desperately attempting to impress a room full of shallow people whom in your heart of hearts you hold in absolute contempt. The ultimate tragedy manifests when you sacrifice not just hours but decades. You spend the entirety of your prime years grinding away in a soulless career path that was originally chosen for you by the anxious minds of your parents. You must wake up to the severity of these actions. This endless chain of concessions is not a demonstration of good manners or politeness. It is nothing less than the slow, deliberate, agonizing suicide of the authentic self. To arrest this fatal bleeding, to truly live for yourself, you must undergo a radical transformation. You must become absolutely terrifyingly ruthless with the allocation of your remaining time on this earth. Consider the profound etymology of the word ruthless. It is derived from the archaic word ru, which translates directly to deep sorrow or bitter regret. Therefore, to be truly ruthless is not to be evil. It is to operate in a state devoid of future regret. You must master the martial art of the negative response. You must learn to look someone directly in the eyes and deliver a firm, unyielding, no completely unburdened by the toxic lingering hangover of misplaced guilt. An acquaintance casually approaches you, demanding a favor that will inevitably drain your reserves of vital energy for no strategic gain. The only appropriate response is a cold, definitive no. An unsolicited invitation arrives demanding your physical presence at a mandatory social obligation that will predictably bore your active mind into a state of absolute lethargy. The response remains no. A parasitic request is made for your focused attention, a request that clearly yields absolutely zero intellectual, spiritual, or financial return on your investment. The gate crashes down? The answer is no. This strict boundary enforcement does not require you to act like a savage. You do not need to be overtly rude. You do not need to puff your chest and project aggressive hostility. You simply need to become completely and utterly unavailable. Visualize the architecture of power. A reigning sovereign prince does not leave the heavy iron gates of his fortress wide open, making himself constantly accessible to every wandering peasant who decides to casually knock on the timber. The prince commands armed guards at the perimeter. He resides behind massive, impenetrable stone walls. He exercises absolute dictatorial control over exactly who is granted the high privilege of entering his inner sanctum. Turn this architectural gaze inward. Why is the gate to your psychological citadel left swinging wide open in the wind? Why do you passively allow absolutely anyone armed with a glowing screen to casually stroll into your mind and loot your attention? You are a sovereign entity, behaving like a ruined, undefended city. You must immediately begin the arduous labor of digging a massive, impassable moat around the perimeter of your time and focus. When you finally begin to execute this defensive protocol, the rejected masses will undoubtedly lash out. They will desperately attempt to shame you. They will loudly label you incredibly selfish and difficult. They will complain bitterly to anyone who will listen that you have suddenly become impossible to reach. When you hear these complaints, you must smile in the dark. This is excellent news. It means the perimeter defenses are actively working. You absolutely should be incredibly hard to reach. Basic economic theory dictates reality. Things that are exceptionally rare are inherently highly valuable. Things that are overly abundant are universally treated as cheap and disposable. If your time and attention are constantly frictionlessly available to absolutely anyone who demands them, you have actively priced yourself out of the market of respect. You have become fundamentally cheap. You must deeply internalize this binary equation the universe operates on: sacrifice. Every single time you utter the word yes to their trivial demands, you are simultaneously screaming a violent no to your own soul. You are explicitly saying no to the dedicated hours required to master your chosen craft. You are saying no to the recovery needed for your physical health. You are denying yourself your own peace. You are actively tearing down the walls of your own empire. By capitulating to their requests, you are committing a crime of priority. You are consciously deciding that their temporary, fleeting comfort is vastly more important than the construction of your eternal, unshakable reality. Machiavelli offers a brilliant counterintuitive economic strategy for the sovereign mind. He explicitly writes that a reigning prince must never under any circumstances fear acquiring the dark reputation of being miserly or painfully stingy. He argues the logic coldly. If a ruler is overly generous, constantly opening the treasury to appease the immediate demands of the mob, he will rapidly bleed his kingdom completely dry. He will exhaust all critical resources, and when the treasury is finally empty, the very same mob that cheered his reckless generosity will violently turn on him. He will ultimately become universally despised because his engineered poverty leaves him weak and defenseless. Conversely, if the prince adopts the grim mask of the miser, if he fiercely hoards his resources despite the temporary grumbling of the crowd, he strategically preserves the vital capital required to actually govern. By fiercely protecting his reserves, he guarantees that when the true crisis arrives, or the grand opportunity presents itself, he possesses the overwhelming surplus power necessary to execute great historic deeds that ultimately benefit the entire realm. You must immediately adopt the mindset of the absolute miser when it comes to the currency of your time. You must obsessively hoard every single hour and minute with the terrifying ferocity of an ancient dragon guarding a mountain of gold. Do not part with a single second casually. It is only when you have successfully accumulated a massive, heavily guarded surplus of uninterrupted time that you can finally begin to invest it in the deep, agonizing work that actually matters. You need that hoarded time to forge the physical and intellectual weapons that will permanently define your legacy in this world. Living fiercely for yourself requires waking up every morning with a terrifying realization. You must look in the mirror and accept that you are currently operating on a non-negotiable death clock. The limited sand in your personal hourglass is slipping through the glass right now as you breathe. The ultimate sin of the weak is surrendering control of the timepiece. Under absolutely no circumstances can you ever allow another human being to hold your hourglass and dictate the speed at which your life drains away into the earth. So we must ask the monumental question, what exactly happens on the other side of this violence? What is the final result when you finally summon the courage to cut the invisible strings of societal control? What is the psychological state achieved when you permanently cease the exhausting daily performance, ruthlessly stop the manic oversharing, kill the people-pleasing reflex, and lock down your time? You cross a profound psychological threshold. You strip off the garments of the slave and finally enter the exalted state of Machiavellian virtue. You must strip this word of all modern sanitized connotations. In the dark, muscular lexicon of Niccolo Machiavelli, virtue absolutely does not mean virtue in the passive, meek, cheek-turning Christian sense. It is not about being a harmless, obedient good boy who quietly waits for his heavenly reward. True virtue translates to martial prowess. It is absolute terrifying capability. It is the raw, untamed, deeply masculine energy required to force the chaotic physical world to conform to the precise architecture of your own iron will. It is the supreme psychological ability to stand firmly on the deck of a sinking ship, to stare directly into the howling, chaotic vortex of Fortuna, the goddess of unpredictable fate, and calmly declare, I will survive this, and I will shape this storm into my hammer. The exact moment you decide to burn the ships and live exclusively for yourself, you aggressively reclaim your stolen virtue. You forcefully rip your identity out of the hands of circumstance and place it squarely back into your own grip. You fundamentally cease operating as a helpless, drifting victim of an unfair universe. You permanently eradicate the pathetic, whining vocabulary of the defeated from your daily speech patterns. You will never again allow the words, I cannot achieve this grand vision because my oppressive family simply will not allow me the freedom to pass through your teeth. That excuse is incinerated. You will never again hide behind the coward's shield, claiming I am paralyzed and unable to move forward, because generalized society holds these specific, rigid expectations of my behavior. The blinding, terrifying light of truth pierces the fog. You realize with absolute, bone-chilling clarity that the single solitary obstacle standing between your current state and your ultimate ascension is your own pathetic lack of internal will. We must acknowledge that entering this specific stage of psychological development is deeply, profoundly terrifying. The terror is structural, because when you play the role of the victim, you are ironically insulated and kept very safe. The victim mindset is a cozy, padded cell. If your life is a miserable failure, but you can point a trembling finger and confidently say, it is entirely their fault that I am not happy, you successfully avoid the crushing burden of responsibility. That avoidance is a highly addictive, comfortable prison. It allows you to rot in peace, absolved of the difficult labor of greatness. But the moment you draw the sword and cut those external ties, the padding is stripped from the walls. When you aggressively seize the heavy reins of your own destiny, the ultimate safety net vanishes. If you charge into the battlefield now and suffer a catastrophic defeat, there is absolutely no one left in the universe to blame. If you fail under the banner of absolute sovereignty, the failure belongs entirely, exclusively, and permanently to you. That immense crushing pressure on the cervical spine is the true, undeniable weight of the sovereign's crown. To understand this weight, we must look at the historical genesis of this philosophy. Machiavelli did not write his masterwork from a position of comfortable luxury. He wrote The Prince while enduring the agonizing humiliation of absolute political exile. He had been violently dragged into the dungeons. He had been brutally physically tortured by the state on the Strappado. He had been completely stripped of his prestigious titles, his income, and his hard-earned social status. He was forcefully banished from the city he loved, relegated to living a hard, grueling existence on a rural farm. He was painfully poor, utterly isolated from the halls of power, and seemingly forgotten by history. By absolutely every single metric utilized by modern status-obsessed society, Niccolo Machiavelli was a complete and total irredeemable loser. He had been completely and publicly cancelled by the terrifying power of the Medici family. Yet observe the unyielding iron of his virtue. He did not surrender to despair. He did not drink himself to death in the mud. Every single evening, after completing grueling manual labor, he executed a profound psychological ritual. He would deliberately strip off his filthy, mud-caked work clothes. He would carefully cleanse himself and then dress in his finest preserved royal courtly garments, visually demanding respect from himself before crossing the threshold of his private study. Clothed in the psychological armor of a statesman, he would sit down at his simple wooden desk in the freezing dark. He would open the texts of antiquity and begin to actively, fiercely converse with the ghosts of ancient kings and dead philosophers, operating entirely within the suffocating vacuum of total societal rejection. Armed with nothing but a quill and his own unbreakable mind, he meticulously authored the legendary manuscript that would completely alter the trajectory of human history. He serves as the ultimate paragon of the philosophy he preached. He lived entirely for himself, driven by an internal locomotive. He absolutely refused to sit in the mud and passively wait for the ruling Medici to grant him permission to exist. He did not neurotically wait for his former friends and fair-weather allies to send letters validating his worth. He bypassed the judgment of his contemporaries entirely and chose to forge an immortal masterpiece directly within the deafening silence of his own profound rejection. Through the sheer terrifying force of applied virtue, Machiavelli alchemically transformed the barren wasteland of his physical isolation into a towering, eternal intellectual empire that still stands 5 centuries later. The Stoic imperative demands that you attempt to replicate this exact internal alchemy. Your daily life is your quiet study. The sum total of your physical and mental actions are the heavy ink with which you write your own book. The moment you make the conscious decision to permanently stop living for the cheap, fleeting applause of the present crowd, your temporal horizon massively expands. You suddenly begin engaging in the agonizing labor required to build a legacy for the distant future. Your motivations fundamentally shift from the external to the internal. You begin executing difficult tasks simply because the strict code of your own nature demands that they must be done completely, regardless of whether they are publicly recognized or socially rewarded. You drag your body to the iron and you lift heavy weights. But the objective is no longer to sculpt a physique meant to harvest cheap validation and lustful glances from passing strangers. The objective is internal mastery. You lift simply to feel the undeniable reality of the cold iron in your hands, to force the adaptation of your own biology, and to viscerally feel the oxygenated blood pumping furiously through your own sovereign veins. You begin dedicating hours to rigorous study and deep learning, but not to acquire a hollow piece of paper to hang on a wall or to beg a corporate master for a slight increase in salary. You study for war. You subject yourself to the fire of education strictly to sharpen the blade of your own mind into a lethal, multifaceted weapon, perfectly capable of cutting through the dense illusions and deceptions of the modern world. You begin creating art, building businesses, or forging systems completely detached from the neurotic pursuit of digital likes or societal acclaim. You create simply as a necessary mechanism to forcefully exorcise the restless burning demons trapped within your own soul. This state of absolute self-contained momentum is the definition of ultimate human freedom. It is the impregnable fortress of the mind, and it is precisely at this exact point of psychological development that you become incredibly dangerous to the established order. Why are you dangerous? Because a man who operates completely outside the economy of social validation, a man who literally needs absolutely nothing from the people around him, is a man who cannot possibly be controlled by them. You sever all the puppet strings. If you have built your own fortress and mathematically do not need a single coin of their money, they lose the ability to purchase your loyalty or threaten your survival. If your heart is a sealed, self-generating furnace, and you no longer desperately require the unpredictable warmth of their conditional love, they entirely lose the terrible power to seduce you, manipulate you, or break you through. Withdrawal. If you have constructed an internal mirror that only reflects the hard truth of your own rigorous standards, and you no longer crave their pathetic validation, they permanently lose the societal weapon to shame you into submission. You become a terrifying statistical anomaly. You mutate into a severe, uncorrectable glitch in the sprawling, oppressive matrix of modern social conditioning. You step out of the herd and you assume the mantle. You become the prince of your own reality. But here, hidden deep within the cold mechanics of this dark philosophy, lies a profound, beautiful paradox. It is a secret that Machiavelli implicitly understood, but very few modern interpreters possess the philosophical depth to admit. The paradox is this: by executing this ruthless internal purge, by cutting the strings, becoming cold, and choosing to live absolutely and exclusively for yourself, you accidentally become a vastly superior asset to the entire world. Let us examine the pathology of the alternative. The weak individual who dedicates their entire existence to chronically living for others is fundamentally diseased. Beneath their performative smiles, they are boiling with toxic resentment. They are deeply, structurally bitter. Every single act of generosity they perform is entirely fraudulent. They give their time and energy exclusively, with heavy, invisible strings tightly attached to the gift, demanding a specific emotional return on investment. Because they lack the courage to speak their true desires, they weaponize their weakness. They become masters of cowardly, passive-aggressive warfare, quietly punishing the world for failing to read their minds and fulfill their unstated needs. The kindness of a people-pleaser is never a gift. It is a predatory high-interest loan. They keep a meticulous, silent ledger in their minds, tallying every sacrifice, and they will eventually come to violently collect the emotional debt they believe they are owed. Through this neurotic transactional behavior, they systematically pollute every single relationship they touch. They slowly suffocate their partners, children, and friends with the heavy, invisible smog of their own unspoken, resentful expectations. Now contrast this miserable creature with the sovereign individual who has mastered virtue and lives entirely for themselves. Because they have fiercely guarded their boundaries and hoarded their energy, their internal reservoir is completely full. They are not starving beggars, they are wealthy kings of their own domain. Their psychological cup radically runneth over. Therefore, when this individual finally chooses to give, the gift is an act of pure, unadulterated power. They give genuinely, cleanly, and completely without expectation, simply because they possess the massive surplus to do so and the sovereign desire to execute the action. They act from a position of absolute choice, never from a position of coerced obligation. When a sovereign individual chooses to love, the love is terrifyingly potent. It emanates directly from a bedrock of immense internal strength and absolute self-sufficiency, completely devoid of the suffocating, desperate neediness that characterizes the love of the weak. We must understand the structural mechanics of human relationships. A strong, fiercely self-possessed individual acts as a load-bearing marble pillar in the architecture of society. They stand firm, completely independent, holding up the roof. Conversely, a weak, chronically people-pleasing individual is biologically akin to a parasitic ivy vine. A vine possesses no internal structural integrity of its own. It can only survive by aggressively latching onto a host and draining its resources. The tragic nature of the vine is that in its desperate clinging attempt to secure its own survival and climb toward the light, it slowly, inevitably strangles the very host tree that it relies upon for support. Vines strangle. Pillars support by radically and ruthlessly prioritizing your own mental stability, fiercely guarding your own energetic resources, and fanatically pursuing your own internal mission. Above all, external noise. You alchemize yourself into a vital pillar. You transition from being a chaotic drain on the system into a massive stabilizing force of absolute order amidst the swirling, terrifying chaos of the modern world. You become the rare, immovable object in a universe of shifting sands. You actively evolve into the exact type of formidable person that others can genuinely rely upon when the storm hits. Not because you are a pathetic, accommodating doormat waiting to be stepped on, but because you have forged yourself into solid rock. Machiavelli issued a supreme directive for survival in a hostile universe. A reigning prince must above all else rely exclusively on the strength of his own arms and the sharpness of his own steel. Do not outsource your security. When you finally discipline yourself to rely solely on your own arms, your own emotional regulation, your own financial architecture, your own physical capability, you unlock the actual capacity to protect the people residing within your walls. If you foolishly rely on the arms of others, if you depend on the state, the crowd, or the unreliable mercy of strangers for your emotional or physical survival, you render yourself utterly defenseless. And by extension, you doom those who depend on you. Look at the brutal reality of family dynamics. Your children do not need you to be their universally beloved, deeply accommodating, nice friend. That is a dereliction of duty. They desperately need you to be an unbreakable, terrifyingly strong wall that stands between them and the abyss. Your romantic partner does not need a compliant, agreeable servant who echoes their every opinion and shrinks from conflict. They desperately need an authentic, formidable equal who possesses the strength to challenge them and the gravity to anchor them. The broader world fundamentally does not need another hollow, perfectly adapted, photocopied version of what the current societal algorithm dictates a human being should be. The world is drowning in cheap copies. What the world desperately requires, what history actually demands, is for you to finally become the most extreme, unvarnished, violently authentic manifestation of your own unique, sovereign nature. Therefore, we reach the ultimate conclusion of this philosophical exorcism, making the terrifying decision to cut the strings and live aggressively for yourself is, in objective reality, the single most profoundly generous act you can possibly perform. It is supreme generosity because it acts as a devastating sword that violently kills the great societal lie. It permanently assassinates the cowardly fake smile you wear to pacify the fragile egos of strangers. It drives a dagger directly through the heart of the hollow, resentful yes that you whisper when your soul is screaming no. It stops the bleeding. It stops the transmission of weakness to the next generation. It completely eradicates the silent, festering resentment that acts as a psychological acid, slowly and invisibly rotting the foundations of families and communities from the inside out until they collapse in ruins. In the sterile void created by the destruction of these pleasant, comforting lies, you replace the rot with absolute, unyielding truth. And this truth, even when it is freezing cold, sharp, and brutally uncomfortable to the touch, even when it violently disrupts the fragile harmony of the dinner table and shatters the comfortable illusions of the people you have known your entire life. This cold, hard truth remains the only structural foundation in the known universe that is actually capable of holding massive, enduring weight without cracking under the immense pressure of reality. So the ultimate, unavoidable question now hangs heavily in the air between us. The philosophical architecture has been laid bare. You have been handed the heavy iron keys to your own psychological prison cell. The comforting illusions have been stripped away. You finally see the grand mental theatre for exactly what it is, a pathetic, self-constructed trap designed to keep you small, obedient, and completely harmless. You now cognitively understand the immense lethal danger of constantly performing for the audience, and you have been introduced to the terrifying invincible power that resides entirely within the mastery of silence. The theoretical portion of your education is now complete. But philosophy without immediate aggressive physical execution is nothing more than mental masturbation. The real test begins the exact millisecond this transmission ends. What exact measurable action will you take when the screen goes black? The omnipotent digital algorithm that governs this age is already calculating its next move to re-enslave your wandering attention. In mere seconds, it will strategically offer you yet another bright, shiny distraction. It will present a meaningless video of a cat or a highly engineered piece of political outrage designed to spike your cortisol and trap you in the cycle. It will attempt to inject a cheap, unearned hit of digital dopamine directly into your retinas, desperately trying to force an immediate chemical wipe of the hard, dangerous truths you have just absorbed into your consciousness. The entire external world is patiently waiting in the shadows, holding the heavy leather collar, eagerly waiting for the exact moment you drop your guard, so it can violently snap it right back onto your exposed neck. The choice is now entirely yours, a binary intersection of fate. Will you passively bow your head, surrender your newly reclaimed virtue, and willingly let the world slip the leash back on? Or will you summon the terrifying courage to forcefully turn off the screen, step away from the digital noise, and sit perfectly still in the agonizing, beautiful, deafening silence of your own sovereign mind? Will you pick up your glowing phone, coldly analyze the list of demanding names sitting in your overflowing inbox, and dare to ask the ultimate Machiavellian question of power dynamics? Do I actively serve you, or do you serve my grand strategy? Look closely at the heavy iron door of the cage that has held you your entire life. Look at the lock. It is broken. The door is wide open. The terrifying truth is that it has always been wide open. You were your own jailer. The only invisible force that was ever actively keeping you huddled inside the dark corners of that cage was your own pathetic, deeply ingrained fear that there was absolutely nothing of value waiting for you out there in the unknown. But that was the final, grandest lie of them all, because everything of true consequence exists outside the cage. Out there in the howling wind and the freezing rain lies the absolute, undeniable, unvarnished fabric of true reality. Niccolo Machiavelli pushed open that heavy iron door 5 long centuries ago. He bravely walked out into the freezing, dark night of historical truth, leaving the warm, comforting lies of the herd far behind him. He crossed the threshold into absolute sovereignty, and his ghost is still standing out there in the freezing dark right now, patiently waiting to see if you possess the internal iron required to finally join him. But the ghost cannot drag you across the threshold. You must deliberately, consciously choose to take that first terrifying step under your own power. You must actively cross the Rubicon of your own psychology. You must completely and utterly surrender your addiction to comfort. You must be completely, unreservedly willing to be actively despised and heavily disliked by the vast, mediocre majority of the human population. You must possess the incredible fortitude to walk through life being fundamentally misunderstood by almost everyone you encounter, accepting that the heights of your ambition are entirely invisible to those stuck in the valley. In order to finally escape the slow, suffocating death of the compliant slave, you must be absolutely willing to embrace the dangerous, unpredictable, deeply isolating condition of deciding to actually live. If this philosophical transmission has managed to violently pry your eyes open to the strings of your own enslavement, you must critically understand the severe limitations of this current medium. What you have just heard is merely the shallow, sanitized surface of a much deeper ocean. This is strictly the preliminary information that is deemed safe enough to be broadcast publicly to the sleeping masses. Beyond this point, the philosophy descends into the absolute abyss. There are vastly darker, infinitely more potent aspects of human psychology and strategic manipulation that fundamentally cannot be discussed in the town square. The architects of the digital algorithm actively and violently suppress this specific dangerous level of information. They censor and demonetize the profound truths because a fully awakened sovereign population cannot be effectively governed or monetized. These hidden lethal doctrines, the true mechanics of absolute power, and the deepest psychological operations of the Machiavellian mind are kept completely sequestered behind a high wall, accessible only to those who prove their spent commitment. If you are still reading these words, if you have not retreated back to the safety of distraction, it proves that your psychological architecture is fundamentally different from the vast grazing herd of humanity. You are a statistical outlier. If you have not yet aligned yourself with this transmission, you must secure your connection now. But for the rare few who demand the unvarnished, terrifying depths of the abyss, you must actively choose to step through the hidden door. You must elevate yourself to the architect level of reality, where the true, uncensored blueprints of the human psyche are laid completely bare on the operating table. In that hidden sanctuary, you will unlock the darkest, most potent psychological tools ever forged by the minds of ruthless men. It is a path of no return. The vast majority of weak individuals will absolutely refuse to take this step. They will retreat to their warm, comfortable cages, and in the cold, unforgiving mechanics of Machiavellian reality, their cowardly retreat is exactly the point. The power is reserved exclusively for the few who are brave enough to seize it. To step into this hidden sanctuary, you must fundamentally restructure the architecture of your daily existence. You cannot simply profess these dark truths in the evening and then revert to a shivering, compliant slave when the sun rises. The dawn is your daily crucible. The sovereign individual does not wake up and immediately reach for the glowing screen to absorb the neuroses of the world. That is the desperate action of a mind begging to be infected by the herd. When your eyes open, you must consciously acknowledge the grim, ticking mechanism of your own mortality. The death clock has consumed another night of your finite existence. The sand has permanently fallen. You are one step closer to the void. This is not a cause for panic. It is the ultimate source of your daily virtue. The acute awareness of your impending death violently strips away the trivial anxieties that plague the weak. It is the ultimate clarifying lens. Before your feet touch the cold floor, you must don your psychological armor. You must vividly anticipate the incompetence, the ingratitude, and the chaotic emotional demands of the people you will inevitably encounter today. You prepare your mind not with optimistic delusions, but with cold Machiavellian realism. You expect the world to be treacherous. When the treachery manifests, you are not shocked into submission. You are entirely prepared to maneuver. Step out into the world carrying this internal fortress. Walk among the sleepwalking masses with the silent, predatory grace of a sovereign entity. Observe their frantic, desperate movements without ever allowing their chaos to break your rhythm. The masses will attempt to drag you into their petty dramas. They will cast their emotional hooks into your flesh, desperately hoping you will bleed for their entertainment. You must become completely smooth. Give them absolutely nothing to catch. When a co-worker approaches you with frantic manufactured panic, do not mirror their elevated heart rate. Let their chaotic energy crash violently against the unyielding stone of your terrifying calmness. Watch their panic dissipate into nothing. Your absolute lack of emotional reaction is the ultimate assertion of power. It forcefully dictates the terms of the engagement. By remaining utterly cold, you force them to either elevate to your level of discipline or retreat in frustration. Let them retreat. Their frustration is not your responsibility. You are not a sponge designed to absorb the toxic runoff of their unmanaged psychology. You are a closed system actively guarding your internal reserves of kinetic energy. To maintain this closed system, you must embrace the daily agonizing practice of voluntary suffering. A mind that only knows comfort is a mind that is primed for absolute subjugation. Comfort is the invisible sweet poison of the modern age. You must intentionally subject your physical vessel to rigorous punishing discipline. Lift heavy iron. Deprive yourself of food for extended periods. Expose your body to freezing water. You must manufacture your own adversity. Why do we actively invite this pain? Because the modern world has removed the natural predators. If you do not create your own dragons to slay, your nervous system will invent false threats. You will become terrified of mere opinions and words. By mastering physical suffering, you forge an unbreakable internal contract. When you prove to yourself that you can willingly endure severe physical discomfort without breaking the petty social discomfort of being disliked, becomes a laughing matter. The man who has voluntarily starved himself for days, who has felt his muscles tear under immense weight, does not tremble when a weak, gelatinous stranger leaves a hateful comment on a screen. He is fully inoculated against their phantom noise. This physical mastery is intrinsically linked to your cognitive dominance. A soft body usually houses a soft, easily manipulated mind. By hammering your physical form into a lethal weapon, you simultaneously sharpen the blade of your intellect. You must become a ruthless curator of the information you allow into your brain. The sovereign mind consumes dense, difficult foundational texts. You must read the ancients. You must study history, grand strategy, and the mechanics of human ruin. Discard the fleeting, highly emotional garbage of the daily news cycle. It is carefully engineered propaganda designed to keep you trapped in a perpetual state of helpless anxiety. It is the modern equivalent of the Colosseum distracting the mob. A true prince operates strictly on long-term time horizons. He analyzes the tectonic plates of history, not the insignificant ripples on the surface of today's engineered outrage. He seeks the permanent laws of human nature, not passing trends. Armed with this historical perspective, you recognize that the fundamental nature of man has not altered a single fraction of a degree since Machiavelli penned his dark truths. The technology has evolved, but the base primate remains identical. Men are still driven by the exact same primitive lust for status, the same crippling fear of ostracization, and the same desperate, pathetic need to violently tear down anyone who dares to rise above the suffocating mediocrity of the herd. Knowing this unchanging truth, you completely stop acting surprised when you are betrayed. You stop mourning the inherent selfishness of the crowd. You simply factor their predictable baseness directly into your cold, strategic calculations. You build robust fail-safes into the architecture of your empire. You never place the entirety of your trust, your financial security, or your emotional stability into the hands of another human being. To do so is to invite absolute catastrophe. Always retain a hidden reserve. Always maintain a secret treasury of resources, a concealed escape route, and a private sanctuary of thought that absolutely no one is permitted to access. This hidden reserve is the absolute core of your power. It is this secret, untouchable core that allows you to smile warmly at an enemy while quietly calculating the precise geometry of their destruction. It allows you to participate in society without ever being consumed by its madness. You become a master of the mask. The Stoic understands that total transparency is a luxury reserved entirely for fools and children. In the real, unforgiving world, transparency is simply offering your unprotected throat to the teeth of the wolf. You construct a highly functional, perfectly tailored outward persona. This persona is polite, efficient, and deeply impenetrable. It gives the masses exactly what they need to feel comfortable while revealing absolutely nothing of substance. Let them interact with the polished armor. Let them firmly believe they understand you. Their false confidence in knowing your nature is your greatest tactical advantage. They cannot successfully strike a target they cannot actually see. Behind the mask, your true self remains perfectly still in the dark, constantly observing, constantly analyzing the board. You watch their lips move, but you only listen to their actions. You track their shifting loyalties and their hidden insecurities. This is the operational definition of Machiavellian virtue. It is not a state of passive floating enlightenment. It is a state of hyper-vigilant, continuous strategic positioning. You are always maneuvering to secure the highest ground. As you ruthlessly consolidate your internal power, your external reality will begin to violently bend to your gravitational pull. It is an unavoidable law of physics. The weak are naturally magnetically drawn to the unshakable certainty of the strong. People will subconsciously sense that you are no longer playing their desperate, exhausting game of validation. They will detect the terrifying cold iron beneath your polite exterior. Lacking their own internal structure, they will seek to lean on yours. This is where the ultimate danger lies. When you become a massive pillar, the parasitic vines will rapidly multiply. Opportunists will approach you carefully, disguising their parasitic intent as genuine admiration. They will attempt to siphon your virtue. You must repel them with absolute unapologetic ruthlessness. You must become a master of the swift, merciless severing of ties. The exact moment you detect a one-sided extraction of your vital energy, you violently cut the cord. No warnings. The reigning prince does not negotiate with parasites. You simply close the heavy iron gate. You let them starve out in the cold beyond your walls. This coldness will terrify them, but it is the exact coldness required to protect your holy fire. Remember that your ultimate loyalty is strictly bound to your own grand design. Every person, every obligation, every passing opportunity must be ruthlessly interrogated. Does this specific element accelerate my ascension, or does it anchor me to the dirt? If it accelerates your vision, you utilize it with cold, calculating efficiency. If it anchors you, you destroy it or abandon it without a single second thought. There is zero room for crippling sentimentality on the steep freezing path to the summit. As you climb higher, the atmosphere becomes thinner. The crowded masses thin out. You will find yourself surrounded by far fewer people, but the quality of the silence will be profound. This is the ultimate isolation of the mountaintop. It is the habitat of eagles. You will no longer be able to relate to the trivial, pathetic concerns of the valley below. Their manufactured political panics, their celebrity worship, their desperate consumption of cheap digital dopamine. It will all look like the frantic scurrying of insects. You have officially broken the societal programming. You have completely uninstalled the obsolete software of the slave. Your mind is a fully sovereign territory heavily defended by the ruthless application of logic, extreme discipline, and unyielding self-respect. The profound tragedy of the human condition is that millions of souls are born, live out their days, and quietly die without ever experiencing a single second of this absolute autonomy. They die as mere faded echoes of the culture that violently programmed them. They spend their entire 80 years on this earth, nervously reciting lines written by long-dead tyrants and modern algorithms. They exist simply as biological batteries generating energetic wealth for the unseen architects of the grand illusion. You have violently refused this grim, unacceptable fate. You have deliberately chosen the agony of the red pill. You have swallowed the bitter medicine of Machiavelli and the cold steel of the Stoics. You have permanently reclaimed your stolen divine agency. But understand this, The war does not end with your initial awakening. The Matrix is entirely self-correcting. It will continuously send new agents, new temptations, and newly engineered crises specifically designed to drag you back down into the mud. You will be offered highly lucrative bribes to compromise your soul. You will be offered the intoxicating illusion of effortless power if you just submit to the collective. You will be threatened with total social annihilation if you refuse to bend the knee. When these ultimate tests arrive, and they absolutely will, you must firmly grip the hilt of your internal sword. You must summon the terrifying spirit of the exiled Machiavelli, writing in the freezing dark, entirely sustained by his own unshakable will. You must stare directly into the eyes of the angry mob, the corporation, the algorithm, or the tyrant, and you must let them clearly see the absolute bottomless depth of your freezing indifference to their fragile, artificially constructed authority. Let them clearly see that they possess absolutely nothing you actually want, and therefore they possess absolutely zero leverage to move you. You are an unmovable mountain of solid stone, residing in a world completely made of shifting, blowing sand. We must now confront the ultimate unseen adversary. It is not the crowd, the state, or the traitor. The ultimate adversary is Fortuna herself. She is the chaotic, unpredictable goddess of fate, the ruthless bringer of sudden storms and unearned ruin. The weak man believes he can magically appease Fortuna through superstition, desperate prayers, or by remaining completely harmless. He believes that if he is small enough, the storm will simply pass over his head. This is a fatal miscalculation. Fortuna fundamentally despises the weak. Machiavelli explicitly wrote that fortune is a woman, and to keep her in submission, it is necessary to strike her and boldly beat her down. She exclusively favors the bold, the aggressive, and the ruthless. She is drawn to the man of virtue who actively refuses to cower when the sky turns black. When Fortuna violently destroys your crops, burns your ships, or strips away your wealth, you must not fall to your knees and weep at the unfairness of the universe. The concept of fairness is a pathetic artificial construct invented by slaves to comfort themselves in the dark. The objective universe knows absolutely nothing of fairness. It only recognizes the cold, brutal physics of leverage, mass, and unyielding force. When disaster strikes, the sovereign mind immediately deploys the ultimate stoic weapon of amor fati, the radical, unconditional love of one's fate. You do not merely tolerate the disaster, you actively embrace it as the necessary fuel for your evolution. You look at the smoking, ruined ashes of your collapsed plans, and you boldly declare, "This is exactly what I required." The fire has conveniently cleared the dead wood from your land. The betrayal has efficiently exposed the hidden spy within your ranks. Every catastrophe is simply a masterclass disguised as a tragedy. Fortuna is violently forcing you to adapt to become harder, smarter, and infinitely more lethal. You must eagerly extract the hidden tactical data from every single failure. If a trusted ally stabs you in the back, the fault is not entirely theirs. The fault is yours for exposing your unarmored back. You miscalculated their base nature. You allowed weak sentimentality to completely blind your strategic vision. You do not waste precious kinetic energy plotting petty emotional revenge against the traitor. Revenge is a reactive emotion, a confirmation that they have successfully disrupted your internal peace. You simply erase them from your reality forever. You permanently revoke their access to your existence. They become completely dead to you. You learn the brutal lesson. You permanently weld the steel armor shut over that specific vulnerability, and you continue your relentless, terrifying march forward. This absolute emotional detachment from outcomes is the impenetrable shield of the prince. You pour your entire soul into the flawless execution of your grand strategy, but you remain completely unnervingly detached from the final result of the battle. You cannot control the random roll of the dice. You cannot control the sudden plague, the economic collapse, or the random cruelty of nature. To tie your internal psychological stability to external outcomes is to willingly hand your sanity over to chaos. You exclusively control your own internal inputs. You control your daily discipline, your physical resilience, your calculated actions, and the unshakable integrity of your own mind. That is your sole dominion. Rule it with absolute totalitarian control. If you execute your strategy perfectly and Fortuna still decides to violently sweep you off the board, you accept it with a cold, terrifying smile. You fought flawlessly. The defeat is physical, never psychological. Your virtue remains completely intact. A man who can lose his entire external empire, yet wake up the very next morning with his internal empire completely undisturbed, is a man who can never be truly defeated. He is a terrifying anomaly that the universe does not know how to crush. He simply walks out of the smoking ruins, dusts the ash from his shoulders, and begins violently laying the heavy stone foundation for an even larger, more impregnable fortress. His spirit is a hydra. Cut off one head and two more aggressive heads emerge. This is the profound, dark joy of living entirely for yourself. It is not the cheap, fleeting happiness of eating sweet foods or receiving hollow compliments. It is the deep, resonant joy of absolute, unyielding competence in the face of total annihilation. It is the terrifying thrill of knowing that you are the undisputed apex predator of your own internal landscape. You have hunted down and slaughtered all your inner cowards. You have exiled the people-pleaser. You have executed the eternal victim. Only the sovereign king remains safely sitting on the iron throne of your consciousness. He answers to absolutely no one. He begs for absolutely nothing. He simply observes the chaotic world, accurately calculates the angles, and executes his indomitable will. So, as you move forward into the hostile, uncharted territory of the rest of your life, you must carry this cold, heavy philosophy in your chest like a concealed weapon. It is your ultimate defense against the suffocating mediocrity of the modern age. Never again allow the invisible hand of they to wrap its cold fingers around your throat. The exact moment you feel the slight pressure of societal expectation attempting to bend your spine, you must violently snap the hand at the wrist. Guard your precious time with extreme, lethal prejudice. Guard your focused attention with terrifying force. Remember that every single breath you take is a rapidly depleting resource. Spend it constructing your own monumental legacy, not decorating their cage. Let the vast, ignorant mob whisper bitterly behind your back. Let them loudly call you arrogant, cold, unfeeling, and dangerous. Their petty insults are simply the desperate rattling sounds of chains clicking against the bars of a prison you have already escaped. You have ascended to a higher, significantly colder altitude. The air up here is incredibly thin, sterile, and absolutely pure. It is entirely unfit for the weak lungs of the grazing herd. Breathe it in deeply. This freezing atmosphere is the smell of true freedom. The heavy velvet curtain has officially fallen on the pathetic tragedy you used to star in. The theater is completely empty. The phantom audience has been permanently evicted into the freezing street. The heavy doors are locked. The stage is entirely yours alone. You are the sole architect, the master director, and the undisputed prince. There is no predetermined script left to blindly follow. There are no external judges left to anxiously appease. There is only the vast, terrifying expanse of your own sovereign potential. Stand up straight, adjust the heavy iron crown upon your head, stare directly into the howling void of the future without blinking. Embrace the glorious, terrifying burden of absolute self-ownership. Now step forward into the dark and brutally rule reality.